Welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas podcast. My name is Danielle Harvey and I'm the festival director. FODI is the original Disruptive Ideas Festival based in Sydney, Australia, that aims to bring to light important conversations that push the boundaries of conventional thought. FODI gathers the world's best experts, innovative thinkers and mischief makers to provoke and inspire curious minds. Journalists play a vital role in democracy, traditionally striving for objectivity, seeking truth, and holding power to account. But with the rise of opinion journalism and newsrooms diversifying, it doesn't matter who journalists are or what they think. And at a time when media business models are in crisis, what does this mean for bias, representation and trust? Join journalists Antoinette Lattouf, Andy Mills and Josh Szeps in the 2024 session Speaking Bluntly, chaired by publisher Louise Adler.
Hi. We're not going to have a respectful conversation today, are we, ladies and gentlemen? I don't think so. But before we begin our conversation, I would like to acknowledge the team that has brought FODI to us this year. Simon Longstaff, Danielle Harvey and Beck Blake, with the support of their many volunteers. I've learned from Adelaide Writers' Week that curating a festival is not easy, to put it mildly. And the FODI team have been a joy to work with, professional, efficient and generous. So please join me in thanking them. Okay, to the business. I'm delighted to welcome everyone here today to join us for a conversation about the practice and perils of journalism. On stage we have Antoinette Lattouf, who's the curator and co-host of the Antoinettes podcast and the news and analysis podcast, The Briefing. She's a multi-award-winning journalist who's also founded the not-for-profit organisation Media Diversity Australia that focuses on increasing cultural and linguistic diversity. And her book, How to Lose Friends and How to Influence White People, has just been published. And yesterday it was delighted to see that Antoinette was awarded the inaugural New South Wales Civil Liberties Council President's Award for Journalism. Congratulations, Antoinette.
Thank you.
Andy Mills is an American podcaster and reporter who created the Daily at the New York Times, co-created the Daily at the New York Times, Reflector, and several multi-award-winning podcast series, including Rabbit Hole, about the internet, and The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, both of which I would recommend to you. They're brilliant. Josh Szeps co-founded the US streaming news network HuffPost Live. In Australia, he co-anchored the national morning TV show Weekend Breakfast and presented the Sydney ABC Daily Live radio show for 3 years. These days, he hosts Uncomfortable Conversations, which you can hear on a raft of platforms and has attracted over 10 million downloads. I think it's probably increasing as we speak. But I wanted to begin by reading, if you'll forgive me, an extract from a book by Martin Barron, the former editor of the Washington Post. In his book Collision of Power, he writes, and please bear with me as I read this. Over the years, Twitter has moved to the centre of civic discourse. It allowed journalists to promote themselves and their insights on a gigantic public stage. It drew public attention to the work of news institutions like the Washington Post. Yet too often it becomes a venue for personal opinions, advocacy, anger, snark, sniping, failed humour, virtue signalling, personal animus and a rush to judgment. Never more so than during the Trump years, when newsroom values of inclusiveness, tolerance, equitable treatment, and an independent press was under attack. For my entire career, Marty writes, reporters and others on news staff have been expected to keep their personal views to themselves. Yes, I know it's distressing, darling. It's very distressing. We're expected to keep their personal views to themselves under any circumstances when they seemed to be representing their organisations. They could provide analysis of news events, but were to refrain from pure opinion, which was the province of editorial writers and certain columnists. They were to keep in mind at all times that, whenever they spoke publicly, their remarks would likely reflect on the institution that employed them. Traditional media companies, after all, hadn't hired them to make a public show of their opinions. They were hired for their ability to cover their news. Their stories, published only after review by editors to ensure that institutional standards were met, were to do most of the talking. Social media platforms like Twitter, however, made it nearly impossible to exercise effective supervision over reporters' public remarks. At the Post, hundreds of journalists were tweeting multiple times a day and at all hours. Pre-publication vetting of all of those postings would have required a sizable full-time team monitoring afterwards what was going on. The vast majority of journalists had no problem abiding by our standards. They were cautious and showed sound judgment. But others, dozens, pushed the boundaries of what was allowed, periodically bursting right through them out of impulsiveness, thoughtfulness, recklessness, and at times a heartfelt repudiation of the idea that journalists should be prohibited from speaking their minds. And now we have a rising generation of young journalists who've grown up on social media. Speaking out on Twitter and elsewhere, they've figured in how they define themselves. They saw it as an extension and expression of their own identity. They don't accept that when they come to work they have to be a different person than the one they are at home or out with friends. We at the Washington Post are headed for a clash of values, the traditional ones I had absorbed and embraced throughout my career, versus an ascendant view that journalists should not be barred from bringing their whole selves into the workplace and shouldn't hide who they really are and how they really feel. So it's a very interesting starting point for us, and I wanted to begin by reminding our three panellists that Journalism 101 students are taught that the role of journalists is to look out the window and report what they see. I wondered if that's your view. Maybe, Antoinette, we can start with you.
I think that's an interesting and a good view, and my only criticism of the media, which is why I co-founded Media Diversity Australia, is just that too often people in newsrooms all sat in the same car and their view from the window was the same because they were most likely to be inner city, middle class, usually male, almost always white. And so, when you look out your window, Bondi Beach looks pretty nice. When I looked out my window, it was very different. Growing up in a working class Western Sydney suburb, someone from the regions has a different window. And so, yes, that's a lovely view, but I wonder, who was it that wrote the little preamble that you read? What was his?
That's Martin Barron, who was the editor of the Washington Post.
Yes, and I wonder whether his window looked a lot like his colleagues' windows. And so I think what's happening in journalism now, there are people with a different worldview, with a different window view going, hey, Martin, I don't know if your perspective is necessarily the right one or the only one.
Josh, your view of Journalism 101 is look out the window and tell us what you see?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, completely agree with what Antoinette just said, and it's certainly the case that for a great many years and a great many decades, the people looking out the window, to strain that analogy somewhat, were mostly white, middle-class, university-educated males from, usually straight males, certainly cisgender males from, cities. Today I would say that there's an equally pervasive and stifling bubble as the limitations of their worldview, which is also an inner city bubble, it's also a university educated bubble, but it's a bubble that aligns along fairly familiar social justice lines where there's a correct way of thinking about issues like sex, gender, homosexuality, immigrants, Islam, Gaza, and there's quite a lot of conformity in that worldview as well. And so the interpretation of diversity, like the need to kind of open up newsrooms and open up our media to encourage more voices, which is something that Antoinette has been a great champion of, needs to be capacious enough to understand what the full range of diverse views is, and not to just do the easy tokenistic thing which sometimes gets done of, well, as long as we cast a Sikh woman and a trans woman and an indigenous woman and a Muslim woman, then as long as that looks nice and diverse, that's great. Well, is there class diversity? Is there, as Antoinette said, regional diversity from the bush? Is there diversity of ideology? Or do you end up with people who are all basically in the same thought bubble saying the same thing?
Andy, I wanted to ask you, we talked before you actually came over from the States, and I think you said that you thought that the role of journalists was to provide accuracy, clarity and objectivity. I wondered whether you could explain. May seem clear, but...
I want to first say I think I agree with my co-panelists here, and I really love you guys' accent. I love being up here with you.
We love your accent too, Andy.
I'm an American tourist, and I'm just having a hell of a time. I just want everyone to know.
It doesn't matter what we say, it's just the accent, right?
I know, I'm just like, I love these guys.
We introduced him to the term duvelaki in the green room, and he's still working out how do we spell that.
We don't have that where I'm
Anyway,
from.
keep going, Andy. Objectivity, clarity.
Yes, I mean,
accuracy.
I think I was trying to say that the kind of journalism that I think I'm an advocate for and that I think might help us rebuild the trust that we have massively lost in the past few decades is a journalism that centers accuracy, clarity, and yes, objectivity. As hard as it is and as much as we will fail to live up to that lofty goal, some section in the diverse landscape of journalism, some people have to do that. Right? We can't all just be doing the journalism that has hot takes opinions. But as I say that, to give context, I do think that this is a very 20th century, it's a certain way of doing journalism, that if we pull back the curtain a little bit and we look at some of the origins of journalism, we go back to before the printing press, but definitely after the printing press. So much more of the history of this trade that we are engaged in, that we are trying to thoughtfully, wield to make a better pluralistic democratic society. Most of the history of it was used to persuade. You had newspapers that were run by political parties or that were run by advocacy organizations. And it really wasn't until the 20th century that you had these new ideals like objectivity or narrative, which is my favorite thing, right? Trying to tell a fair story about someone so that other people can understand them, whether or not they're like them, whether or not they share the views of those people. That was a very new idea, and I just want to note that it was also in the 20th century that we had the highest level of trust. So even though, as Antoinette pointed out, the lack of diversity all across the board was an issue, I think we have to reckon with the fact that as we sort of diversify the landscape of what is journalism and who can participate, and we have to get into digital, I do think that the core of it being, at least some of it being about accuracy, clarity, and attempts at objectivity, will keep us from just becoming, I choose the journalist whose views reflect my own and who make me feel good.
Yeah, I just wonder if we need to part with this obsession with objectivity, because as you said, if you look at the history of newspapers and institutions, and we know that journalists, we all bring our own biases, and we know that some outlets have very overt agendas, but spending so much time trying to convince ourselves we're objective, I think, is futile, because we're not, because I think we should strive for fairness and accuracy and present facts, but I don't think we need to beat ourselves up about, we just need to be objective. And when you talk about trust and these papers having more trust in the 20th century, I think so many things have happened. Obviously, the internet has disrupted it, but 20 years ago, because we didn't have alternative sources of information, and we had a newspaper that we believed, and we flicked on the 6 p.m. news, we didn't have as much accountability. And so when there were weapons of mass destruction, for example, in Iraq, and that line was repeated and repeated and repeated, unlike what we're seeing with Gaza, the narrative told by leaders who have a stake, a financial and political, in going to war, are being interrogated much more now than then, because we did trust, because we didn't have alternative sources of information. And so it wasn't a beacon of the best type of journalism. Some people look back and go, that type we should strive to be like that. I mean, there was many problems with the state of journalism, not only about who was telling it, because almost every editor and journo and writer was a privileged white man. And so the journalism was told from that worldview. And so, I'm just reluctant. I'm reluctant to go to the good old days.
Can I add a wrinkle?
I'm not trying to be the MAGA of the moment here and put
the
rose-colored glasses.
Yeah.
But I'd say it in the sense of there was a lot of really terrible things happening in the 16th and 17th century in Scotland, including witch trials and all that. And then during the age of the Enlightenment, the David Hume, all these people, they also flawed people, terrible things going on. But there's a reason that we try and take what was good about the Enlightenment and carry it forward. And I'm saying without rose-colored glasses on the 20th century, for sure, and the limitations and maybe some of the naivety that they had forced into the society through the lack of options, acknowledging all that, there's something happening right now. We didn't just lose the trust because, the internet's mean. We lost the trust because, in a lot of ways, journalists don't deserve your trust.
Yeah,
and that's the thing that can get us to earn it back.
And there was a clearer delineation between news and opinion. You went to the opinion section in the newspaper.
Can I just pick up on that? There are a couple of distinctions that I think will assist here. Let me see if they're useful to throw in. One is that a lot of the conversation when we talk about this stuff gets confused about whether we're talking about news, the kind of news that you want to see when you open the front page of the newspaper, or the way that we have conversations about the news. So Antoinette and I are mostly in the game of having conversations about the news. My podcast, Uncomfortable Conversations, is all about how we have conversations. It's a meta conversation rather than being original reporting. Andy, you've tended to do more original reporting. And I think you can hold two thoughts in mind at the same time. One is that journalists who are doing reporting on news, who are investigative journalists who are supposed to be uncovering the truths about the world and delivering them to you in an impartial way, should be ruthlessly impartial. And they should hold as a kind of the light on the hill, the ultimate ideal of fairness and balance. And that there is an objective truth, that of course they're going to be flawed in striving towards understanding the objective truth. And objectivity may be even the wrong way of phrasing it. Maybe fairness is a better way of talking about it. But that they should be ruthless every single day about stripping away their own preconceptions, their own judgments, and their own biases in order to deliver us all a common set of facts. And then on the content side of things, which is the kind of industry lingo for commentary, the kind of radio show that I had on the ABC, the kind of radio show that Antoinette was filling in for when she was dismissed. In these scenarios, what you're really talking about is just spitballing, wrestling with ideas, talking about cooking, talking to politicians, talking about what's going on in the world. And in that environment, there actually should be far less insistence on narrow objectivity, far more of a recognition that to solve the problems of the 21st century, we need the largest range of diverse voices, all spitballing and speaking in as rambunctious a terrain as possible. So I think it's worth distinguishing between news and talking about the news, and between objectivity, which may be an impossible goal, and a sense of fairness and upfrontness and openness. In some ways, I think audiences are most, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think audiences are most fed up with phony objectivity when you see a presenter who is obviously putting a little bit of spin on a question but pretending to be ruthlessly objective, or they interrupt too much, or just as they're thanking someone, they slide in a little comment that lets you know that they didn't like what the person said, but they don't give the person the opportunity to talk back to it. You know, those sneaky little ways of posturing as if you're objective but actually being fundamentally unfair are, I think, the worst thing that's going on in the media at the moment. It'd be much better just to be upfront about the fact that I have biases, I'm coming at this from X perspective, but I'm going to be ruthlessly fair to anyone who disagrees.
Okay, we'll come back to this question of fairness.
Once again, I agree with
your fellow white male. You're allowed to.
I say both. I say both my panelists say fine.
It does say a lot about...
You're a recovering Christian fundamentalist. We don't hold that against you.
It does say a lot about the current... It does say a lot about the current climate, that imagine any other sex or race being able to say that about any other sex or race.
Oh, please. Okay,
imagine if it was me hosting this and there were two women of colour and I was like, oh yeah, say the two women of colour.
Yes, the much persecuted white male. So...
Keeping it spicy.
I want to go to another question, please. Each of you have parted ways with media organisations that have employed you.
No, we haven't.
No, we haven't. You've separated. In many ways, you've been
it was a conscious uncoupling. A conscious uncoupling.
Yeah, I like that. A conscious uncoupling. So we're in the era of the personal story here. I think we've got far too many of them, but nevertheless, they can be riveting. Okay. So I wanted to begin by asking each of you if you could tell your story, and I wanted to begin with you telling the story of Caliphate, because I think that's a very interesting instance of what actually happened, the fallout from it. That was a very successful series, and whether you could explain what happened in the making of the series, the aftermath of it, and your own personal experience, the social media consequences, if you like. And we've got 38 minutes left.
I will do so in the most brief way possible, because I'll try and gear it back to this, I think, good debate that we're having about different kinds of journalism and different kinds of responses, because a podcast that I created with my colleagues at the New York Times, and I helped report with the kind of star terrorism reporter at the New York Times, Rukmini Callimachi. It's called Caliphate.
Was that around, terrorism reporter?
She was off. That was what it would put on the bottom of the TV when she would go on.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She reported on all kinds of different terrorism, but this was during the really, I think, frightening time when ISIS was very regularly attacking civilians around the world. I think we forget now, because news cycles are so short, just how much of a global story that was. And a part of it was a lot of young men leaving Western cities. Oftentimes their parents went through a lot of hell to immigrate and make a life there. And these young men were leaving that middle-class life to go and join the Islamic State. And this podcast tried to understand the draw of the Islamic State. We went to the Islamic State, and we interviewed prisoners. We interviewed a lot of people. We did a lot of on-the-ground reporting. But after it came out and millions of people listened, and every kind of award I ever dreamed I would win, I won with my colleagues. 2 years later, it turns out that one of the main former ISIS fighters that we spoke to appeared to have lied to us, been a fabulist. And we had done our best on the podcast to catch him in some of his untruthful statements, but it became a scandal. And
what was the scandal that you had failed to recognise, acknowledge, and
the
uncover?
nuances of it can be tough. I mean, I'd say the simplest way to say it is that how dare the New York Times make a mistake like this? And then how dare podcast with such a big mistake, how dare that become essentially, I mean, they taught it in schools. They gave us awards. It was beloved, and it appears as if we may have really fucked up. And the consequences were more than it would have just been for an average story. Just, these things happen. And it created a number of different controversies that we won't have time to go into today that ranged everything from Rukmini's reputation as a great storyteller who told a riveting tale, and accusations that she and I, as her producer, were too focused on a great story when maybe we should have been focused more on if we were being lied to. That was one angle of it. There was another angle of it that was about, how do you handle a moment like this where it appears that somebody who we had a whole team that was behind fact-checking all that. How do you handle this moment? And the New York Times attempted to sort of tuck it away. Their big thing was, don't do anything interesting. Like, let's make this a one-day thing. They treat it like a PR thing, where I think we would have been wiser to tell people exactly what happened and to show our work and investigate as much as we could have. But this started a series of Twitter dog piles, some of them from the right. They were happy to see the New York Times in trouble, especially because they were like, oh, you used to call our podcast misinformation, Then there's people on the left, some of them who thought Rukmini had focused too much on the Islamic religious aspect of the terrorism that she covered. And eventually it led to a bunch of people attacking me personally, bringing up some stupid, regrettable things I did years ago, and painting me as not only a bad journalist, not only a bad person, but as a privileged, white man who, despite, skeletons in the closet and having to return coveted awards, was still one of the top people in my department at the New York Times. And they demanded a reckoning, that I lose that power, that I lose that standing. And
which you did.
Eventually so, yeah.
How long after that did you lose your job?
Well, I'm not famous, so it took a while. They couldn't get that many people that angry about,
But But they wanted the story to
producer
get
of
away.
a podcast.
The point was to get the story, to bury the story, the static around it. Correct. And one way was to let you go. Correct. Is that your view of it?
The Times' big thing is let's try and move on. We've got a bunch of stories we're in the middle of. Let's not get lost on this podcast we made 3 years ago. They want to move on, and then a lot of people online were like, absolutely don't move on, and if you want to move on, get rid of Andy. And it sort of snowballed over the course of, it took about 5 weeks for it to hit ahead. And it wouldn't have probably happened, because like I said, I'm not famous, but in the midst of people wanting me to lose my job and position and making that case online, a few other colleagues of mine at the Times also were involved in scandals. And so the group of us together eventually had to go.
Antoinette.
Oh dear. Okay, so I was filling in as a presenter on the ABC. I assume most people here are probably familiar with my story. I was not an ongoing ABC employee. I was an independent freelance journalist doing a bunch of things. And as soon as it was announced that I was on air at the ABC, pro-Israel and Zionist lobbyists were coordinating some sort of official organisations. I'm very popular on some WhatsApp groups, calling for me to get fired, orchestrating letters to get me fired, simply for being, how dare the ABC hire somebody like me. I was one of the journalists who signed the petition challenging the media's coverage of Gaza, calling for fairer coverage, calling to humanise Palestinians, calling to not to bow to lobby groups, not to just recite IDF talking points without interrogating them, giving the well-documented history of lies and fabrication, and to use the words apartheid, use the words and attribute them where possible, absolutely attribute them to organisations, attribute them. And as a result, I became very unpopular amongst cohorts who were staunchly in support of Israel. And as soon as I was on air, wanted me nowhere near a microphone, not for anything I did on air, simply for who I was and what my political opinion of what is happening, the ongoing war on Gaza, the ongoing genocide, the ongoing targeting of journalists, which I will continue to speak about. And as a result, I was... Thank you. And as a result, I had, actually before I go on, I'd want to say hello to the mole from The Australian that's no doubt in the room. And by mole, I mean it in both senses of the word. There's no doubt there'll be a hit piece on me after this, because as well as targeted attacks from the Zionist lobby, there's been orchestrated attack by parts of the Murdoch press to intimidate the ABC and intimidate me. It hasn't worked, and it won't work. And so I was, after being congratulated for doing a great job on the show that day, at a meeting with all of the station at ABC Sydney, like a weekly meeting, I was then called into an office and told that I had shared a Human Rights Watch post. It was in breach of the ABC's policy, which it is not, because the ABC had 3 times reported on it itself, and that I should pack my bags and leave. It was humiliating, it was distressing to have to leave a building in that moment as though I was a criminal, as though I had done something wrong. I think perhaps what the lobbyists and the ABC didn't expect was for me to go, this is wrong. I will not go away quietly. There's too much at stake. Some people go, well, you only had another 2 days left. What's the big deal? I'm like, the big deal is an ABC that appears to be very brittle to external attacks. And the big deal is that journalists are still petrified to fairly and freely report on what's happening in Gaza.
So Josh Bornstein, who's acting for you, I think he was in the paper just today, certainly in The Age, talking about Jason Gillam's
the Melbourne
Symphony Orchestra debacle, and own goal, certainly debacle and own goal, and saying that in his legal opinion, journalists have a right to their political opinions and have a right to express them in the workplace. So the counter view would be that this constitutes activist journalism.
I love this term.
Yes, so I wondered whether, we'll come to you, Josh, in a moment, forgive me, but I wondered what your view
please.
of that
and
was.
I could listen to Antoinette all day.
Yeah. But what is an activist journalist? Because, and this is where I think, often... so, for example, I've got an example here. So the Daily Telegraph ran a piece just last week. The move to bring all public servants back to the office comes after a Daily Telegraph campaign to get people back into the office after it was revealed businesses across the CBD were struggling to get trade with people working from home. So the Daily Telegraph can call it a campaign because the Daily Telegraph's doing it. During the No More rallies, a prominent ABC presenter attended the rally, shared her signs that she wants an end to gendered violence, as do I, but she attended. So there's no more kind of like activist. You think of an activist, you think of a picket line, and you think of a sign, and you think of a protest, and then hyperlink to a piece she had written. Is that activism journalism? And what is activism and what's considered a matter of controversy? Because I essentially got fired because I shared a post on a matter of controversy. Who gets to determine that? And that's usually those with the most power. So at the moment, the Daily Telegraph decided businesses in the CBD, they need their employees back, and the coffee shops are probably struggling, and they've probably been in touch with the Small Business Council, and we need to get people back. So when they do it, it's a campaign, and it's fair game. When I do it, I'm struggling with impartiality. I'm described as passionate. The fact that I have an Arab background is brought into it, because I couldn't possibly do my job properly because I'm an activist. And often that label of activist is used for people who are minorities, whether there's gender, sexuality. So very rarely will that label be given to a dude called Peter who is 60. Peter is just running a campaign to get businesses back on track in the CBD, and good on Peter, and here, have an award. Me, it's like, shut the fuck up, you're fired. And so I hate that activism journalism because it is applied so differently. And at the end of the day, I shared a Human Rights Watch post, and I maintain my political opinion that you do not target and kill journalists, you do not target and starve children to death, you do not target an entrapped population and carpet bomb it. That is my political opinion. That is my political opinion.
Josh, you've also separated from, I think is one of the HR terms, from the ABC. And you've been very nuanced about the way you've described it. You've talked about wanting to produce spicier content than you thought was sat comfortably with the ABC. Maybe you could explain.
Well, sat comfortably with the ABC management as it was instantiated in 2023 is important to say. I think my approach, and to a large extent Antoinette's approach, although we differ on... I love Antoinette and have loved Antoinette since long before any of this happened. Antoinette was on my podcast among one of the first guests on my podcast. I went into bat for Antoinette when all of this went down. She and I think, have certainly different emphasis on the war in Gaza and on a great many issues. But I think she's a straight shooter, and what the ABC did was batty. That being said, the tradition of the ABC is a tradition of contrarians and a tradition of defiant, courageous journalists. It just... The management happened to get its knickers in a knot last year, and somehow managed to blunder through a series of catastrophic personnel stuff-ups, from Stan Grant to me to Antoinette. And I think there's a lot of hope on the horizon now that the institution has a new chair and the managing director is leaving, because it is fundamental to the public broadcaster that it courageously speak truth to power and that it have a wide range of different points of view. I think I was collateral damage at a moment where, I would love... In some ways, Antoinette's version of being cancelled is like what my 6-year-old would think cancellation is if you explain to them what cancellation is, because it was such an obviously terrible strategy by the ABC. It was like... So here's a person who is not doing anything on the air that is in the least bit objectionable, but a cabal of powerful white males on a secret WhatsApp group who are working on behalf of a foreign government conspire to get her fired by sending a note up the chain to, the only other thing you needed would have been Ita Buttrose with a white cat stroking it in an evil lair to make it a more perfectly obvious, that is obviously contrary to the aspirations of a broadcaster. If it were me and I were hiring a fill-in person for 5 days, less than 10 weeks or whatever after the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, I probably would have been very careful to make sure that it was a person who had expressed no opinion about that particular event, in which case I probably wouldn't have put Antoinette in the chair in the first place. Once she's there,
Well, why?
just leave her there.
No, but you had just described what we did was cooking and play music, and it wasn't political
only
reporting.
because
It's
I
not
knew-
PM.
Yeah,
it's
only
not PM.
because yes, you're right, but only because I knew that it would keep me up at night because people would be clucking about it all over social media and in WhatsApp groups, right? The thing is, once you're there, then there's absolutely no grounds for letting someone go just because you upset a particular cohort of the population. The reason I say that I'm almost jealous of how clear-cut the case is in Antoinette's case, is that the way that cancel culture and taboos are normally enforced is it's actually a much more subtle thing. Mm-hmm. It's me being asked by the Sydney Morning Herald during World Pride to write a piece about whether or not I believe in World Pride as a man who's married to a man, because the op-ed editor of the Herald knows that I'm skeptical of the whole pride thing and could write an interesting piece about whether or not there will come a day when it might be more useful to turn the volume down rather than up on sexual difference. And when I write that piece and it goes up the chain at the ABC, they say it can't be published because presenters aren't allowed to take public positions on controversial cultural events.
And that's the thing. What's who determines what's a
what is
controversial cultural event? Because
also
there are plenty of presenters
at
who share
exactly
their
the
views
same
on the
time. The ABC is the official broadcast partner of World Pride and has gigantic rainbow flags festooned in the lobby, and every single other presenter, all of them straight, are banging on about how wonderful World Pride is, and every second guest is a guest talking about World Pride, but the one gay presenter isn't allowed to pipe up and question it because that would be to express an opinion, at which point it becomes clear that the prohibition is not on expressing an opinion, it's that it has to be management's opinion.
Yeah.
So, Josh,
right? And I don't want to say that was the reason. That was the first moment at which I thought, okay, there's a fundamental, disagreement in the way that we see my role in this organisation. Then I'd reported on the Tavistock closure in the UK, which was touching the transgender issue, which at the time was considered incredibly taboo, and so I had to spend half a day replying to angry emails from people who were saying that I was guilty of hate speech and had the blood of trans children on my hands because we were reporting on, questions that psychiatrists and healthcare professionals were raising about paediatric transgender care. And then ultimately, in the week that everything went down with Antoinette, while that was all happening to her, that was supposed to be my final week on the air, and I was told...
Was I filling in for you?
No, you were filling in mornings, and I was on an afternoon, so the show immediately after Antoinette was my full-time gig. I wasn't on for 5 days, no offence, but I've been there for years.
Oh, none taken.
And I was told not to come in for the final week because I did an unpaid appearance on Sky News where Shari Markson had texted me and said, do you want to come on and talk about your podcast, because she'd liked an episode that I'd done. And because I wasn't in the office that day, it was a day off, a registered day off, I didn't have access to the internal intranet that you're supposed to submit the request form when you're doing external work, and even though it's unpaid, it technically qualifies in the fine print as being external work. So even though I'd been on the Today Show talking about my podcast, I'd been on other podcasts talking about my podcast, other presenters constantly go on friendly other outlets and talk about things without punishment, they could find the technicality that I hadn't submitted the correct paperwork in order to get approval, and I went on what is obviously an unfriendly network in the eyes of the ABC because it's Sky News.
I mean, the eyes of anyone, it is an unfriendly network. Outright hostile. Cray-cray.
It's the inconsistency that's galling. It's the fact that we all know that there are rules that get enforced at certain times and rules that don't get enforced at other times, right? If I'd gone on any other outlet, then they wouldn't have picked up on the technicality. So it's this persnickety, petty, paranoid, censorious, risk-averse, hyper-cautionary approach that was taken through, I hope, the old guard at the ABC, and I believe a fresh wind is on its way.
All right, so I need a quick answer because we've got to go to questions from the audience, and there are 2 microphones over here if people would like to join the conversation. But I've got about 85 more questions, and we've only got 18 minutes.
Okay, we'll be super quick in our responses.
We'll be quick responses. Josh, in your podcast, you've been very clear about talking to dissenters, people whose views you don't necessarily share. I wondered if you thought that all opinions are equally valid, and whether you don't worry that might lead you to, I have my truth and you have yours. Aren't there some truths that are just plainly wrong?
Yes, absolutely. All opinions are totally not. I would never. That is the opposite of my opinion. That all opinions are valid. I think there are good ideas and bad ideas, and the job of my podcast is to interrogate which is which.
But you don't bring your own opinion to
yes,
those?
I do. Yes, I do. I do, in a totally fair way. I mean, I think that my job, I see my job as a contrarian, trying to open up people's. I think we live at a moment where there are all sorts of forces, social media being the main one among them, but demography and the legacy media being others, that are forcing us into echo chambers and that are making us more confident that we're right and that are demonizing other people's points of view. So I see my podcast and my job as a way of trying to open up people's preconceptions a little bit, nudge them 10% towards people they would normally disagree with, articulate the most generous possible interpretation of views they disagree with and views that I disagree with, and wrestle with things in as bullshit-free and tolerant a way as I can in order to blunder my way towards the truth.
Andy, you've sort of talked a lot about, particularly the making of podcasts, your passion for storytelling, for narrative. In that context, do you think that, my truth is as important and as valid as any other truth?
I've never understood this idea of more than one truth. I just don't know how we're defining the word truth. So, I mean, my background is that I originally went to a Christian college to be a minister in a particularly fundamentalist faith. And when I went through the humiliating experience of realizing how narrow my view of the world was and how arrogant it was that I thought I had it all figured out, and if you didn't believe exactly what I believed, you didn't just have a bad life, you went to hell forever. On the other end of that humiliation was a great freedom to realize that the world is very complicated and that no one has it all figured out, and to kind of push away that certainty that I'd had. And that's what led me to want to become a journalist, because as I understand it, a big part of the job is to spend time with people not like you, to understand how they came to hold the views that they have, what impacted them, figure out what they believe and what holding that belief does to the world, to their lives, to the community. And that curiosity-driven factor, it doesn't mean that when I profile QAnon or I profile, I just came back from a Free Palestine rally at the DNC, and I interviewed so many kinds of socialists that all don't like each other, right? They, like, the DSA crowd doesn't want to do anything with this other socialist crowd.
Nothing like the left to do factions. We do them better than any other part of the world.
Oh, I mistakenly said one was DSA. He's like, I'm not DSA.
Definitely not.
That's the Democratic Socialists of America. They're currently winning numbers-wise. But I'm just saying, my job isn't to say which one of these is the right one. I'm just trying to say, here's what people believe. Here's how the world's impacting them. And if you want to, even if all you want to do is argue that your kind of socialism is better than the other guy's kind of socialism, you want journalists like me out there who are doing a good job of telling you, here is not just what a person believes, but here's the story of how they've come to believe it, of why it matters to them.
I do think, though, as journalists, we have a responsibility to not give too much mic time, so to speak, to... Like, we have an enormous amount of power. So, like, with J.K. Rowling and your podcast and her tweets, which started off as curious and now she's, like, pretty batshit, I think, her narration, which, also led to the pile-on on the Algerian boxer Iman Khalif, who's not a trans person, but she got dragged into all of this trans hate, and also which was laced in racism. I think when we give prominence to people who are not experts, like, we have an enormous amount of power and responsibility too. There is discussion and debate to be had about trans issues, but someone who writes fantasy novels probably ain't the authority on it. And so,
have you heard the podcast? Have you heard all of his?
I've heard not all of it. Not all of it.
I mean, you should listen to all of it before editorializing about it.
No, but I'm just saying. But even
wrong, you got to get to the big ending.
No, but even not just with your podcast, but with the amount of times what she says and thinks is reported on when we're talking about trans issues. I'm like, And if anything, she showed herself to have little regard for women's safety with what her treatment of Iman Khalif. And so I'm like, I'm just saying that we have to be careful.
Everyone has to profile the people who are in the hot seat. I mean,
but
people said this about
because sometimes they're in the hot seat because they're making a lot of angry noise.
QAnon was a big version of it. Think about it. Why are we even giving time to this? People know what QAnon is here?
Yeah,
unfortunately we do.
Yeah. But one of the reasons that it's good to spend time understanding QAnon and how they came, a lot of these are suburban, middle-aged women. How did they come to believe this? Is not just revealing about what QAnon believes. It's that when you hear how they got there, you're like, oh, that's how almost everyone's forming their beliefs now. They're hanging out on the internet. They're building communities on the internet of other people who think like them. They think that they've found a calling in life that's important, that if I tweet this, if I share this, if I attack the right people on the internet, it might be good. And to see that that's how QAnon got there, and then you turn and you're like, actually, that's not too different from people around me. You're not just learning about QAnon, which is good, but you're learning about a broader experience of humanity. And J.K. Rowling's views are very popular. They're probably closer to the
Can I just chime in with one last? Yeah, let's do that. But can I just say just one button to that exchange there? Antoinette, I think what you undervalue is the sociological reality that there will be a backlash when people feel like there's a certain censoriousness, and that the habit of excluding. I've got a whole piece in the Herald today about this. If you want to pick up an article, there's a long op-ed by me about exactly this in the Herald.
We're not doing promotion.
You'll sign a copy in the back.
The point is basically that if you want to undermine like hate and offensive content and insulting content and the kind of populist right, the best way to do so is to not alienate everybody who tries to have rational conversations about taboo things and to try to actually interrogate them and be as generous as we can to
Okay, we're going to stop.
Here endeth the sermon.
Excuse me. We're going to stop and we're going to take questions from the audience. Please.
Hi. Hello.
And I should say I'm supposed to tell you questions, not statements, please.
Hi. So I just want to say that I'm a journalist who was practicing in India for a while. So I understand all of the, the issues that come with being a minority. Do you think this idea of all these newsrooms across the world putting across these social media policies is just an extension of stifling minority views? Because some of these views would never come out if if they were to go through the same gatekeeping structures in newsrooms that are predominantly edited by men, with a lot of power.
Quick response, Antoinette. We won't ask
it's really tough. I think social media policies, whether it's newsrooms or corporations, are really difficult to enforce. I think it's really murky terrain. What I would say, I think, is the biggest challenge for younger journos and journos from diverse backgrounds or any minority backgrounds is more that the industry is so casualised. So there's a lot of sort of gig economy, doing a little bit here, doing a little bit there, and so you need your social media profile and social media presence to get the next gig. So it's really kind of set up in some ways to fail, because it's like, don't have an opinion but be known, but you've only got a 4-week contract, you're going to get the shittest pay rate, be grateful, next. And so I think that the entire ecosystem makes it very hard to know what to do online. Am I active? Am I looking for my next gig? Do I look for exposure? Because rarely now do you have somebody who has, a 15-year career at the same outlet. The model is just fragmented and changed so much.
Another question, please.
Firstly, thank you, Antoinette, Andy, Josh, and Louise. In these 55 minutes, I have seen more honesty, sincerity than in the last 15 years. That's just personal opinion. That's true and accurate. That's credit goes to you. My question, though, goes to something that I discussed at the beginning about the loss of trust. I actually want to ask a very blunt, very respectful, but very blunt question to 3 of the panel, actually 4 of you. 2 events I mentioned. Chris Masters, August last year, Defense of Truth, and Andy may know 2022 Monk debate on integrity of media, and from the US there was Matt Taibbi, and from New York Times, by the way.
I watched a lot of YouTube,
I actually was lucky to ask Chris Masters a question. What happens when tough, honest journalists like yourself will go away to the retirement? And I said, I feel concerned. And he actually shared my concern. My question is that, what do you say to the point that The loss of trust arises from the fact that this new generation of journalists, they're actually losing integrity compared to, broadly. This is kind of very crude question because of the time limitations, but I hope you understand. I would appreciate your response from all of you guys.
Andy,
Maybe
you start.
Andy.
Integrity.
I mean, I think that the thing that's happening to journalism is happening to a lot of institutions, including things we don't often think of as an institution, like the family, like your friends. We aren't taking time to say, what are the values that are the bedrock of the enterprise that we are striving for here? What is the name of these values, and are we actually living up to them? And how do, of course, you never quite capture them. It's like objectivity. You're never going to quite get there. But if you're striving to be fair, if you're striving to, be ornery, whatever you want to be, just know the value you have and try and strive for it. And then I think that when you talk about the weapons of mass destruction, all these things, this comes in a little bit with the caliphate, you also need to be humble. That obviously you don't have it all figured out. When COVID was going on, this is a time when you don't need opinion journalists. I need people who can tell me, how does it spread? And you want objective-driven journalists who are going to give you the real answer for how it spreads in a moment like that. I just say that exists. We should spread that out further and further. You also print what you have reported with humility, because you don't have it all figured out. And you're always
but we have to give credit to Josh, who actually had his moment with Joe Rogan when you actually called out, importantly.
Well, yes, I called him on vaccine misinformation. Just one last thing about the...
You called him a menace to public health, which I thought was great.
Did I?
You did.
Sounds particularly spicy.
It was.
On the weapons of mass destruction and just holding power to account and being skeptical of governments that want to get us into war, all of that is true, and I think it's also worth being mindful of the fact that now with the democratization of journalism and citizen journalists talking about stuff on Instagram and getting a lot of information from anywhere and everywhere from just videos that they see and clips and things, there is also a hazard that you're getting information from people in Gaza, for example, to take that example, who serve at the pleasure of Hamas, and none of the information that comes out of Gaza does so without Hamas's approval.
No, if someone's posting to their Instagram, that's not vetted by Hamas.
Let's see what happens to them if Hamas doesn't like what they're posting. And they're in Gaza.
I'm saying
so there are two things. You have to hold the hold the IDF to account. Also, be skeptical of the morass of information that's floating around the web.
I'm just going to add one last thing. What do we do about trust and integrity? That is why the ABC is even more important. A well-funded, independent, strong ABC is so important, and that's also why I'm fighting the fight I have, is because I love the ABC, and I think as an institution it is so important, not only for our democracy but for the future of journalism.
Yeah.
Another question.
Hi. I think we need to have more spicier conversations. They're lots of fun. Aside from leadership changes, how do you see workplace cultures collectively changing? Because we're seeing in the media at the moment, places like Swill House, the construction industry, all sorts of industries have these cultural issues as well as newsrooms.
Channel 7.
So aside from, leadership change, how do you see the collective change that can happen in workplaces?
Antoinette, sorry to lob that
I mean,
at
you can take it if you want. I'm
go.
honestly constantly baffled when I read stories like the Swill House thing. It's so far from anything that I've experienced. I mean, in terms of also diversity in the newsroom. My newsroom's majority female. All of my producers were female. My boss was a female. It was
ABC radio is very, very, very white, though. Very white.
So very white.
Yeah.
It's pretty yes, but also quite ideologically, coherent. Not non-diverse, but I just don't understand how those workplaces are still around. Who are these guys who think that rampant misogyny and sexism
They got a lot of power.
It's like they're 2024. Did you not get this memo in 2018?
Where are they? They're occupying the C-suite.
Yes, they're on boards with huge
Actually,
pay
they're on the
packets.
boards. They're managing directors. I mean,
House.
it's quite clear where they are, Josh.
Yeah.
It's not it's not new.
Yeah.
Anyway, we need to keep going.
Yes. Thanks, panel. Fascinating discussion. What do you think about the Australian government's plans to introduce anti-doxing laws, including jail time? I know all of you have received death threats for your work.
It's so much fun. I recommend it, yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask, what's your view of the leak of the 900 pages of the Jewish Creatives WhatsApp group? Yes, some of them, a small minority, were lobbying, but most of those people wouldn't have had anything to do with the lobbying, and some people got death threats. So I wondered, what's your view of those two issues?
Me particularly?
Josh, yeah.
So your first part of the question of the anti-doxing laws, I think I'm always sceptical of laws that are rushed as a result of a moral panic and pressure from lobby groups. I always think it's important to take pause, to look at what legislation we have in place. If it's not, usually we have laws that aren't enacted very well, or investigations which fall short, because when you go to the police and say this has happened to me, they're like, oh, maybe get off Instagram, maybe close your WhatsApp. And so I'm more in favour of reviewing what we have, seeing what the loopholes are, and then yes, absolutely, if people need protecting. It was fast-tracked. It was so fast that I'm suspicious of just whether or not it was as a need to introduce more laws, or whether it was in response to a bit of a panic in the press. In terms of the doxing, I have two things to say about that. Whether that actually constitutes as doxing, I don't know. Again, the law is unclear.
Are you talking about the Jewish WhatsApp thing?
Whether it technically constitutes as doxing, I don't know. For some, it's, people would say that it was in the public interest, it's accountability. My understanding, because I actually didn't look at those names that were released, it wasn't all members, because I absolutely know that there were people on there who didn't check the messages, who were there for community, who absolutely
I found myself on there for no reason. It's a really great feeling as a Jew, finding yourself on a list that you didn't know you were signed up to. And you know you're on the right side of history when you're compiling lists of Jews.
Yeah. So wait, you're in the WhatsApp group?
You think you're on the right side of history in that moment?
No, I'm being sarcastic.
No, well
I'm saying who compiles a list of Australian creative Jews and thinks they're on the right side of history?
Those people on those lists were working to get me fired and other people fired. So there were many bad faith actors in that group who were bullies, who were awful. Do I want them to get death threats? Do I want a Jew list? Absolutely not. But also, I don't want rushed legislation because there's a bit of a moral panic.
Can I just also say,
it's not fair. It's not fair.
Yeah, sorry.
We know we are having conversation. Please, we've got other. Forgive me.
Yeah. Well, they are here to watch us talk.
We've got 1 minute 1:18. No, they're here to have a conversation and to engage with us. Please.
Yeah, my question is for Josh. You sort of made a casual aside about how you and Antoinette differed on Gaza. And for 10 months, we've watched footage come out of Gaza. We've seen it with our own eyes.
Why do I have a feeling a speech is coming?
It's a question.
Maybe is the question, how do you differ? What's the opinion difference?
No, my question is when we've seen, just this week, I've seen at least 10 children who've been killed in the most brutal possible ways, and we see that footage, and we've seen it for 10 months. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate how there can be a different view on such clear, indiscriminate slaughter of a captive, people who are trapped.
All right. I understand.
I'm just genuinely, I'm wondering if Josh can elaborate, because I don't...
Yes.
Yeah. No, I understand.
The question.
Yeah, I understand the question.
Thank you for your question.
I can't elaborate because we have 10 seconds left, and
we're allowed to go 5 more minutes, apparently.
No, but I don't want to elaborate because I don't think the question is asked in good faith. On the question on the thing about the Jews on a WhatsApp group, if you go back into that WhatsApp group, you'll find that that many people were added to that group against their will.
Yeah, right? You can just add people.
And the only contribution I ever made to that group was to encourage people to not be censorious. And I mean, I did an entire episode of my podcast last year.
I think the question, to be fair, I think that question is being asked in good faith. I think it's
my microphone.
Insulting.
Where do your views differ to mine? Where do you say, we have great discussions, which we do. We give each other space to talk. I go on your podcast. You've always checked in on me. You've supported me publicly when I was fired. But you did make the point that your views of Gaza differ to mine.
I think that I appreciate the complexity of the geopolitics more than you get just from looking at the screens that this questioner is looking at. It's a long and horrible situation, In the past, I've been an anti-Zionist. I certainly think that the Netanyahu regime is a corrupt and warmongering regime. I certainly think that Israel needs to create a Palestinian state somehow. But what's happened since October is that the existence of Israel itself, or the existence of the legitimacy of a Jewish homeland at all, has become conflated with the behaviour of the Israeli Defence Forces in Gaza, and a cherry picking of wartime atrocities. And I oppose the way the war has been conducted, but to be fair, I don't think many of the critics of the way the war is being conducted are military experts who know how better it should be conducted.
Or not conducted at all. I think
well, it has to be conducted in some way. If you want, so I guess the difference would be, I don't think it's tenable for a jihadist death cult to continue to rule Gaza. Therefore, it's a tricky situation. And so, yes, my position would be one where you can listen to. I did an 1.5 hour long episode wrestling with this on my podcast, and I would invite anyone to listen to that if they want.
So I've got
clarity.
a big sign up here in caps saying, please wrap, but I feel terrible because there's one more question.
Okay, we'll be very fast. We'll be very fast.
Very, very quick.
No, we need to get to the next question.
I can't. We can't do it because I'm really getting the wrap here. Forgive me, I'm going to have to close it. I'm being...
Okay.
Sure.
Let's do this.
Thank you for taking my question. So I had a little rant, but I'll skip that. If I look around the room here, there's a lot of white men here, and I would like to believe most of them are decent people.
Yes.
I am tired of people using white men as punching bags. I hate using the terms white. I'm a brown woman. I hate using these terms white, brown, blue, black, yellow, purple, whatever. When can we elevate our conversations above petty things like that? And if we talk about inclusion and diversity, why are we constantly dishing on white men?
Okay, so I'm just going to let Andy, because I think he's the most succinct you'll get this. Forgive me, I love you both dearly, but Andy, 2 seconds, and then we're really going to be winched off the stage.
I would say that in the last 10 years of this struggling to see what the internet is doing to our society, we've been in the social media chapter, and it's not going well. And that a shallow understanding of identity that social media encourages then gets transported into a good conversation about diversity, but it gets stuck in the shallowness, and then people, the norms of society are being dictated by teenagers who make a thing go viral, and suddenly people are talking about Riz, or they're saying, fuck all white men. We're going to get through this.
We're going to get through this. Okay, we're going to get through this. It's a lovely place to end. Please join me in thanking Andy Mills, Antoinette Lattouf, and Josh Szeps. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you.
This session was recorded live at Carriageworks Sydney in August 2024. The Festival of Dangerous Ideas is presented by the Ethics Centre. The Ethics Centre delivers programs and experiences designed to bring ethics to the centre of our life. We offer counselling for individuals, leadership and development services, events, courses and educational resources. As a not-for-profit charity, we rely heavily on donations and memberships. Please visit ethics.org.au to find out more. Thank you.